Okay, so we're going to start class back out. I'm just going to Slack you the general Bootstrap link for layouts and grids so we can get some more additional information and see if we can do more complex things with layouts and grids in your own free time. As I mentioned earlier, just to reiterate, the version we want to be using is Bootstrap 4. The reason behind that is that it's in 4 where they introduce the syntax where you don't have to state the viewing size that you're currently using. So you could use things like just call 12 and Bootstrap will figure out what's going on based on your viewing screen. So just want to get that mistake out there. Props to Nolan for noticing that. So we get that resolved. Next, 4. 4 is the one you want to be using. I did. That's incorrect. Yes, we want to be using 4. Yes, so definitely use 4 because that's where you'll find the syntax where you don't have to state the medium and larges and things like that. Because now we're going to talk about what that actually means. So, small, medium, and large. What does that pertain to? That pertains to the viewing size that you have on your web page. If you go to the official documentation, they'll tell you that the max container width size pertains to specific pixels. So small would be 540, medium 720, large 960, extra large 1140 pixels. And small pertains to SM, MD, LG, so on and so forth. There's still 12 columns, but they do different behavior based on how you resize the page. We're going to look at a very simple example that I have over here. In this example, I have one container, one row, and let me make this bigger. One container, one row, but 3 columns. And those columns have 3 different class names. What I'm saying is that I want this to do different behavior based on the viewing size on my browser. So for small, I want them to take up the entire screen, the column to take up the entire row. For medium-sized screens, I want them to take up, well, we have 3 items, so I want them to at least try to space them out. If it can only have space for 2, it's only going to do 2. And then for large, I want it to spread across 3 individual columns. So let's see what that looks like in a demo, just so that you can clearly understand. When I refresh the page, I have A, B, C across 3 columns. That would be column large, because right now I have a lot of screen real estate right now, and it's going to add up to 12. So that would be 3 individual columns. Does that make sense? When you have a large screen in front of you, it's going to space them out so that you have 3 columns, because I stated we're going to have 3 individual columns for A, B, C. Now I'm going to reduce the size. And Bootstrap, with the best of its ability, is going to try to adhere to the information that I've given it. I said, for a medium-sized screen, we're going to have the columns take up a space of 6. So even though I have 3 items, A and B is going to take up a size of 6, which would be 1/2 page for each. But C is going to wrap all the way down because it doesn't have the correct information on how to handle this third case. So it's going to do what it can do to wrap the information around so it still makes sense. And then if I reduce the screen even more, you'll see that I told Bootstrap that when the screen size is really, really small, let each individual column take up the entire row. And that's what's going on over here. Each row has now taken up the entire space. And we can keep going smaller, but it'll still maintain that size. So once again, for a small screen, it's going to try and take up the entire real estate for that column with 12. When you have a medium size, it's going to try and take up half, because I told it to take up 6. And then for a really, really large screen, it's going to do 4. This is just how you guys can have more like fine-grained control of how your information is being laid out on your screen. Now, I want to show you another example where I didn't state that, where I didn't state the individual conditionals for those columns. So let's say I just have column large takes up 4 spaces of 12. So you'll notice it looks exactly like the one above, because it's exactly the same class names, 4 for each column, which adds up to 12, so that's correct. But now I didn't give it the case on how to handle really, really small view sizes. Bootstrap is still going to attempt to make this look nice for you, but you're not going to have that fine-grained control over what happens. So when I scroll this down to medium size, you'll notice it just threw everything to the side, while the one above at least attempted to have an additional column for B. And then when you go to an even smaller size, then they all kind of match. So Bootstrap is going to still try to make things look nice, but if you really want to give it fine-grained control, you really want to have fine-grained control, you want to add the different view size class names so you can control what your users are seeing. Does that make sense for everybody?
When writing code, do we always have to state the first part where we put all the types of screens, or is there?
I usually start without specifying a view size, because Bootstrap will attempt to try and squeeze things together. But if that's not enough, if what they've done automatically doesn't fit your needs, then you'll want to get more fine grained and add these individual view size class names. Questions? All right. So moving on. Yep. Yes, this is being recorded. I slacked out the YouTube link earlier, and I'll upload it so that you guys can look at that whenever you need. Panopto never works for me, so I just do YouTube Live now.
Does it matter the order you put the class names in?
The order? No, it doesn't matter the order. I can move this all the way to the front, but it'll still do the exact same thing. The only thing that matters is that you have named the class names correctly. No, this is very case sensitive, so there's no such thing as a a call with a capital C. That will be incorrect. Bootstrap won't understand what's going on. So everything is case sensitive. Order doesn't matter. All right.
But conventionally, I guess it goes from large. Does it go from small, medium to large?
Conventionally, sure. But once again, convention is really just a group of people's opinions. It's good for when you're working in a big engineering team that we all do things the same way. But if you're coding individually yourself, then it doesn't really matter. Cool. Let's see. So yeah, so the very next thing we're going to look into will be layouts. Well, not necessarily layouts, but taking advantage of some of the tools that Bootstrap provides you. But before we do that, let's take a look at the exercise that we just did. Lorem ipsum. Who was able to complete this exercise and get it looking like the image? Raise your hands if you're able to do that. All right, perfect. So this will be really quick. Let's look at the solve solution. So it's really straightforward. What you have was your body, and of course you always start with your container. Remember the order is container, row, column. So for your header, that's going to be on its own row. It's going to have a column that spans the entire page, and the header is just going to sit over there, like so. Then on the next row, we expect to see a column, a row with 3 columns in it that add up to 12, which would be 4 each. So for them, what they did was they stated 3 for each column, but now you have that extra space on the side. As you can see, this is padded over here. They didn't necessarily have it span across the page. Everything is subjective, but Bootstrap will know that to add up to 12, you need an additional column. So it's just going to leave that blank until you add information in there. So it's just going to take up space for each individual column. That adds up to 9, and then leave the 4th column blank and empty. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions on why that happened? Cool. And then for the next one, we're going to have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 times 2 is 12. That spans across the entire page, and you're going to have a row of 6 individual columns with some lorem ipsum in it. And then finally, the final row will just be 2 individual columns, column 6s, and yeah, and that's pretty much it. They use small viewing size. As you can see, Bootstrap will still try and space it out as well as it can, but all of that is subjective. Any questions on this activity before we move on? All right. Next thing, we want to take a look at Bootstrap nav bars. Bootstrap nav. Slack this out. The cool thing about Bootstrap is that there's a lot of copy and paste code you can grab from their website and throw it into your own website for speed. So the thing we're going to copy and paste today would be called a nav bar. If we scroll down, they'll give you an example of what that actually looks like. What it has is it has a link over here that could potentially be an icon. You could have like a home link, regular link, a drop down link, a disabled link. You could even throw a search bar in your nav bar. As I said earlier, once you've seen one Bootstrap website, you've seen them all. This nav bar is very popular in websites. So yeah, so let's do that. Bootstrap gives you some boilerplate code you can easily copy and paste. Let's do that. We're going to copy it, and we're going to throw it into the example that I had for you guys earlier. So let's see, where do I want to put this? The nav bar always goes outside of the container. We're going to throw this over here. Just raw copy and paste. Let's see what that looks like. And here we go. We've got a nav bar in my website. That was really quick. Now it's really up to you guys to edit this to fit the site that you're trying to build. The reason I said this goes outside of the container is because if I copied and pasted this inside my container, you'll notice that Bootstrap has some default styling for a container. Let's see what happens. And it kind of centers it in the middle of the page. That might be what you want. Maybe that's not what you want. But now you're aware of what goes on when you throw it inside a container. Everything in container has some default styling that Bootstrap throws onto it, and it might do things that you might not want it to do, as you saw earlier. So, yeah. So, for the purpose of this demo, I like my nav bar out, so it spans across the page. There's a lot of nonsense in here that I don't care about. Maybe I don't care about a drop-down menu, or maybe I don't care about all these options. Well, I don't care about drop-down menu. Let's remove that. The whole thing. All I care about is just the icon link. Is there a question?
Could you go back to your Bootstrap
webpage? Yeah, sure.
So I can see what you just copied the top, or you did the whole thing?
I just click this little copy button right here, which copies the entire thing.
Oh.
That's it. The point of this example is to show you just how quick it is to get things going in your website, and then you can begin to remove the trash that you don't want. So Now I have this navbar icon over here and a button. I don't care about that. I don't care about any of this stuff, including the search bar. Just remove all that stuff. Refresh the page. Now I have a nav bar with just my icon over there, and I can build the rest of my page. So Google is your friend. The hardest part about Bootstrap is understanding what exactly it is that you need. They have a lot of options, a lot of examples on their webpage, and as you begin to get familiar with the different names like Jumbotron, what is a Jumbotron? They'll give you an example of what that looks like, and then you can make a decision, well, maybe my website does need a Jumbotron. So I'm going to copy and paste that. I'm going to throw this in my container. And I'm going to refresh the page. And now I have a Jumbotron on my page. Just to reiterate, the hardest part about Bootstrap is trying to figure out what exactly it is that you need. So this weekend, definitely spend some time walking through each individual component and seeing what options are available to me. What is a popover? When someone tells you that they need a popover on their website, you'll be able to understand what exactly that means. So if I click the button, you see that this is a popover. It means it's like a pop-up for a specific component on the screen. What is a carousel? Let's scroll down. It's a slideshow component for cycling through items. Scroll down the page. I can see that's the first slide. This is the second slide. Is there a third? Is there a third? Maybe there is no third. Let's refresh this page. Well, anyways, you also have options to have a button, and you can throw the carousel, move the carousel if you want. The whole point of this is just to understand what's available to you. You can also have breadcrumb links. So, in the next exercise, we're going to try and get familiar with all these individual pieces. And we're going to do something called a card layout. Let's take a look at what that looks like. What it is you're going to have a nav bar. As you saw earlier, we're going to go to the Bootstrap nav bar. We're going to copy and paste it and remove the pieces that we don't care about. We're going to have an About Me section. We're going to have an image. We're going to have some text over here. And then we're going to have this little panel over here. I'm not going to tell you guys how to create this, but just know that panel is a hint. So Google that within Bootstrap and see what you can find out. But before we even get into that, how many rows do you see over here? You can just yell it out. 3. So let's contain our thoughts to within here. So within here, I can see one big row with 1, 2, 3 columns. So this looks like one row with 3 columns to me. Once again, this is very subjective. It could be possibly, this could be actually 2 columns, 1 row, 2 columns, and with all this stuff in one column and all this stuff in another column. So once again, building out a layout can be very subjective to do the exact same thing, but I would definitely advise you to try to go the simplest route. And when things begin to get too complex, definitely try and take a step back, sketch it out, and try and figure out what exactly it is you're trying to achieve. So for the next, let's see how many minutes do we have. For the next 30 minutes, so until 1:15, we're going to work on building out this specific layout. And we're going to do this from scratch. Your activity folder doesn't have an unsolved version. So as I said earlier, you're going to hear this phrase over and over again. Build a website, what does that mean?
Set up a template.
Correct. Set up an HTML template. What does your HTML template need? Very first thing. It needs a Bootstrap link to what version? Correct, version 4. And then, how are you going to get the nav bar? Go to bootstrap.com, search for the component nav bar. Copy, paste, remove what you don't care about. And then, you probably want to start, if you're still uneasy about rows and columns, sketch out what you think this looks like, and then begin to build it within your container.
2 questions. Can we do this with the default Bootstrap classes, or will we need to write custom CSS?
No, this is all default Bootstrap classes.
And if we had to make a
Correct.
Would we alter the default Bootstrap class?
No, you would write custom CSS.
So in a separate file.
Correct.
And add a class to the
Yeah,
file.
you could do it in a separate file, or you could write it inline in the style tag. Cool. So yeah, we'll do this for 30 minutes until 11:15. I'll be walking around. Feel free to ask questions or work in a group, whatever you feel most comfortable. Oh, and to reiterate, the hint for the card title is panel. So if you Google Bootstrap panel, you should find a whole bunch of information.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just saying this would be a practice for
Yes. Panel? Yeah, bootstrap panel. Oh, since it's actually been some time, I'll just post a link to it. Interesting. Okay.
So
It's actually. Question? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was going to say the name has changed in 4.0. It was panel. Now it's card. So let me post that. Yeah, these are some of the issues you can find when you have different versions. So when you work with others, definitely make sure that you guys are all on the same version. Oh yeah, sure. You should also have it in your activity folder. Gotcha. Well, you can get rid of the thumbnail, right? Just make it just a regular image.
Oh, okay.
Well, they've been doing this since every movie they're like teenagers. They're starting at 10, and they're geniuses. And everyone starts off with, I have to the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, when I was 8 years old. Like, yes, it was so easy. I am so smart. Now watch me type keys that make no sense into green screen, like cursor. But why can't you say use telepathy or something? Why would he use his fingers? He's God. Hey, or maybe just send the idea into your head. That's true. Because it's basically just super. with not as many powers. Well, there are rules. God did put rules. But music love it. We're stopping time and like chilling out for a million years and not doing anything. That's what I would do. I just stop time. I'm like, you know, guys, don't worry. You're not dead. You're not alive. You're just moving very slow. Let's make a part two. How was that? I watched it.
So I definitely not good, and I want to move. Like there is this gap, right?
They should fight him.
And I think it's because
Like two godlike entities, and then like they throw galaxies at each other.
yeah. Okay, so either I have to switch one of those. Okay. Okay.
And the good thing about being so late is that most of the things that we know already, like the foundation, all you have to do is just learn the language, and then there's the foundations. It's much easier to paint a wall than build the wall or the foundation of the house. Just go into your apartment. Yeah, exactly. If we were 10 years later, it would have been different. And it's not completely satisfied. You have to talk about it.
Oh, it's yeah, placehold. That is
The first row. All of this is in one row. Or no, sorry. The whole thing's in a row. Two big pieces. This one here has two rows. The first one is about the second. The second one.
I don't have it yet.
I was gonna say.
I wish they did. So you gotta Google it. CSS references.
So the whole once you're below the net.
Okay. So I need this. Oh, what is that? Are you putting everything inside the header? That's what we understand. Yeah.
One column
So
for
you have your language, all this other stuff.
and then within that first column, I made two more rows and then a header and another row and that row.
So she has her page there. She has her header. She has a body. You didn't push it. Push it because it's in her body. She has to push it because we pull it. One thing you missed is just close.
I did 4 columns. And then all year I added breaks to bring it down.
All because you didn't actually know.
Yeah, I did 4 columns.
I just offset it.
Yeah, I don't want to do that yet.
An extra class.
that's what it is right there. So you need what you need to do is whatever you need to do.
Yeah, you can start making like high school.
So you're close enough to that point. There. So which one is sit down here? So you want to put so in the same row. How could you possibly do
First row.
if you look over there, you have second row, second row, just two rows. So this could be one row column, second row column 6 rows. And then this was 6. Yeah.
Yeah. So in my main row, it's the entire thing. This is the second row.
All having three equal sizes is not beautiful because they're so much you see that little ones here with actually right now. What I did was I did two A's and two B's within this A. I divided that up into another bit.
And these two inside this.
You don't have to do it that way.
Yes. Right now, you're just using that.
So you
Stuff is just
So right now,
and one, then the second one is in this. And inside this one, I've got two columns.
oh, that was tight. So your job right now is to be able to switch and start creating some divs and those are different sections right there. You got this one parts.
The buttons.
You know how the original here is go here and go back to like that. It's the same mistake again. Well, it's part of the second application. So when it's complex,
I believe I have from the beginning and separate.
okay.
I forgot this.
So,
No. I do because I saw that.
one more item back here, but you copied something else.
Yes.
Okay. And make it. So which one is that for the hard time?
Yeah, that's the one. So if you
Yeah, well, I've got this. There.
That's what I'm saying.
I got a header.
I didn't do that.
I think I'm on this. It's hard for me to read it.
Exactly. So like the variable force it to look
For those using Visual Studio, does it have like an auto indenting feature where if you highlight everything, it can all like sort itself out?
Format section.
format section?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would do you guys a lot of help if you did auto indenting and auto re-indenting, because HTML tags get very messy very quickly, and it's hard to tell which div closed to what div and what header is closing the other. So just save yourself some headache on and just re-auto indent and format it. It's in the format menu. I don't actually have Visual Studio Code, so.
What you do, until you guys get used to setting up really with like JavaScript, it's setting up prettier. Just highlight your code, right click on it, you'll see something that says format document and format section. And what it'll do is it'll automatically indent and move from the white space. But don't try to set it up right now, because if you do, you'll have to start creating like the VS Studio tags and it gets confusing. So wait till you guys use JavaScript, and when you learn about that, that'll help you with syntax.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them to create their own custom CSS class, or
Just Bootstrap.
So go back to it. So you have to move this one now.
So this column size is small.
Okay. So what you do here, you can
You can make
I gotta get you guys to start thinking horizontal. So you gotta be visual. Sometimes you gotta be visual learners. Div, that's basic. Sometimes you just need div to give you spacing, and that's exactly what it is. You may not need that margin top, it's fine. That's giving you 5 pixels.
Cool.
Put it in there. So
Okay, so we're gonna kick class right back into gear. How many of you were able to solve the entire exercise? Can you raise your hands? Okay. I think the hardest part behind this is really just making sure you don't get lost with your different div tags and what's closing what and what's doing what, because it's really just a reiteration of what we've seen before. When we take a look at the code, if you take a look at the solved solution, remember, when you're building a web page, as I said earlier, you're starting with your HTML tag. That's the very first thing, and make sure you have a closing HTML tag at the bottom. Then you have a header. Your head tag is what's going to have your link to Bootstrap. That's what's going to give you access to all the CSS classes that you require. Once you have your head tag closed with your link inside of it for Bootstrap, then you're going to have your body tag, and your body is what's going to hold all the content within your web page. As I stated earlier, if you want to use a nav, typically people like their navs to span across the entire website, so you would use that outside your container, because if you move it inside your container, as I will do over here, and I'll refresh the page, you'll see it brings it to the center because it's within a container. Because Bootstrap is assuming if you have a container, you want things to be kind of centered nicely within your web page. Typically, that's not what you want, so I'm going to undo that and move my nav outside of my container, but within my body tag, so it spans across the entire page. So that was number one. Body tag, nav, and then we have a div that has my container. Remember, you need a container if you want to take advantage of CSS layouts, the whole grid design, which would be container, row, column. That's the order. You need to remember that. So we have a container that has, in this specific example, we're going to need one row. This is just one way. Remember, this is only one way of doing this. You can tackle this problem a multitude of ways, but for this specific example, they're just using one big row, and within that one big row, they have two columns. One with a size of 8, and the other one with a size of 4. We can imagine that this whole About Me section is the size of 8 because it's the longest section. And then this card section over here is the size of 4. So let's take a look at what's inside of 8. Within 8, we have a header with a class page header. Once again, it doesn't have to match the image 100%, but it has an About Me section within that column. And then within that column, we have another row. Let's inspect and take a look at that row. So this is the entire column that we have over here. And then we have the header section that sits within that very first column. And then within that column, we're now going to have a nested row, which will include its own columns. That would be the image and the text you see over here. So when I mouse over that row, you see it encompasses that whole block over there. And you'll notice that it has 2 columns, one of size 3 for the image and one of size 9 for the text. Questions on that? Nested rows within a column. Cool. Then, after you're done with those, and let me close this over here, we'll move over to the next div, which is of size 4, which includes the card. We're going to open that up, and we're going to see that it's just a div with a card that has the class a div with the class card on it, and it just has like card title, card subtitle, card text, all that stuff you can find in the card components of Bootstrap, which gives you many different examples with cards and text and colors and buttons and all that stuff. But the main core of this exercise is understanding how to lay out your website in the way that you want it. Does anyone have any questions on this specific exercise before we move on? Nesting rows, nesting columns, why things were organized the way they are over here, so on and so forth.
You really want to say there's no other way?
No, there's many different ways to do this. That's what I'm saying. Don't get too hung up that your answer doesn't match the column numbers that you see in this solution. I could have easily made this, I don't know, column row 5, and then made this other one, I don't know, 7. And so when I refresh the page, you see it shifts. It looks different, but it depends on what you're trying to get.
I've got the same book, but it's a different way. It's not one row that I made.
You probably made like 2 rows. So that's going to add a little bit of spacing differences, but it all depends on what you're trying to do. The whole idea was that I wanted you to get as close as possible to this, but it doesn't have to match it 100%. Because I want you to get familiar with structuring your web pages using rows and columns and understanding what it means to have 2 columns inside of a row and so on and so forth. Question?
Only really
One big row.
and then those 2 are within.
Because, I mean, let's see. Let's edit this code. I just want to show you another really quick example. So let's say I didn't want to do to have one big row. I want to have an additional row. No, that's not what I want. Div. And within this div, I'm going to call this class row. And instead, what am I going to do? I can move all this stuff into a second row and leave About Me in just in one row. So let's do that. Alright, let's see what this looks like so far. Alright, so now we have About Me in this section over there. We see this card over here, and now this is all in another row. But if you wanted to now move card title over here, then what you could potentially do is squeeze the size that you're using for this image and this text so that card title now sits in the very 3rd row. So there's many different ways to get to the final result. All depends on what you're trying to do. Alright, next, before we run out of time, we're going to talk a little bit about media queries. Now let's see if there's any pertinent slides for media queries. Okay. This is how you define CSS styles when you're talking about when I say the page size. Another word for the page size would be the viewport. Viewport could be the device that you're potentially looking at the page from. It could be a mobile device. It could be a big screen like this. It could be my laptop. That's why you have the SM, the medium, the large. You're kind of defining what does my website look like when my screen real estate gets smaller and smaller or larger and larger. You can do pretty interesting things based on the size of your screen, and the way you can do those interesting things is by using a media query. What is a media query? Let's take a look at the code. If I look at exercise 17 in their style.css, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll notice something called @media screen, and it also includes a max width. Using this syntax, you can say that on the screen, when it's at a max width of 768 pixels, I want the color to be this value over here. Let's actually see what that means. HTML code 333. All right, it's going to be gray. So, and then what happens? Then the wrapper's width will be 600. Let's open this up and see what happens. Let's open this up in a browser. Media Basic. All right. All right. So as you can see, when the page reached that pixel size that we wanted, it got even darker, and it turned into the hex color 333 that we had stated inside our CSS. Once again, as it got bigger, it got lighter. As it got smaller and hit that pixel size, it got darker. The way this is defined is going to be inside that style.css, and we're saying the default background color is going to be of hex code CCC, which is this lighter color you see over here. When you load the page on the very first time and it's of a size that's bigger than what's stated inside the media query, is going to be this light gray color. As we scroll down, we're going to say when the screen is of max width 768, we're going to change the background color to that darker color over there. That's all that's happening in this particular example. So it's just a way to have new, to do different behavior on your website based on the screen. So let's add an additional screen. Yes, that's what you need to use, because that's how your HTML, your browser is going to read this, that this is a media screen, and so you want something to happen at a specific size. So if I reduce this down to, let's say, I don't know, 400, and I want it to be red, refresh the page, I'm going to get smaller, smaller. Oh. I feel like did it like flash red? No, let me get rid of this. Blah, blah, blah. Alright. Okay, let me try something else. Let's go bigger. 1000. There we go. Looks like my screen is overriding it. Okay. Let's try and find some syntax to reset it if you want to have multiple media queries. Let's Google that. When in doubt, there's always Google. Multiple media queries. If you want to have multiple things happen at different sizes. This is gonna be pretty much your activity when you are when you're a front-end developer. You're gonna be Googling a lot for examples, because syntax changes, versions change, class names, as you saw earlier between Bootstrap 3 and Bootstrap 4. when in doubt, Google is your best friend. So let's see. So for media, all, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Let's go to Stack Overflow. And remember, there's nothing wrong with using these types of resources. In fact, it's to your best interest to use these types of resources. So we're missing an and. All right.
Is the reset CSS doing anything for that?
Let's find out. When is that being called? So there's a reset CSS. Let's comment that out and see what it does. Not entirely sure what that reset is doing, but I do know there has to be a way to get multiple screens. So let's check out this fiddle. All right. Yeah, let's copy and paste this into our code. Let's comment all this out. Let's just get rid of it. Okay. So now we see different behavior happening. When it gets really, really small, and as we slowly get bigger, it turns to white, and then it's going to turn to black again, and then back to gray. How is this happening? Because we set up two individual conditionals. We said when there's a max width of 1,500 pixels, the background is going to be what is Xcode 000. Let's find out. HTML code. Okay, 00 is black. And then when we have a minimum width of 768 and a max width of 1,240, it's going to turn it to FFF, which is white. And we can actually remove this stuff because we don't care about that. So this is just an example of showing you that you can have multiple conditionals in your CSS to do different behavior and do cool things should you so feel the need. But so when I'm within those brackets of 768 and 1,500 is going to override the default body background, which was of gray. But as soon as I get bigger than 1,500, it'll revert back to the original CSS. So questions on media screens. It's pretty straightforward once you get the syntax correct. I think the hardest part behind it is just understanding the different pixel sizes that you care about and what that would look like on individual people's devices. So we're going to do a really quick exercise on you guys playing around with that. We are providing you with boilerplate code. We have media unsolved, and feel free to copy and paste the one from the instructors media in 17 just to get you going, and play around with the media queries and let me know if you have any questions. We're going to do this for about 15 minutes, and the point of the activity is to pretty much duplicate what you saw before, where you're going to add styling to the media screen and change the color when it's 768. It doesn't have to be that gray color that you saw earlier. It could be red, it could be green, it could be whatever you want. The whole point of it is just want to get you guys some hands-on experience playing around with media queries. So we'll do this for 15 minutes and then move on. Any immediate questions? Cool.
are we just kind of doing random stuff, or
Just random stuff with media queries. Just changing changing the background color based on the different pixel sizes. Let me make this bigger. I've also posted a link to some examples of a W3 example for media queries that you can play around with that helps you in this exercise.
bigger, so that when it's minimum width, this picture.
There's not really much to this exercise. It's really just playing around with the different pixel sizes and colors in the background.
Oh, no, you can't do that. So you can't use the word angle. You can only have one background color. You can use the okay. That would be the max though. The max is 449. But yeah, right. Another video, right? But that would be a max. And then the minimum would be 0. If anything would be 0. Got it. All right, cool. All right. You said, like, you were never really going to change. Hey, you're from Sasha.
Yeah.
Cool. With the glasses, like kind of yellow shirt.
Oh.
Like the first day, I was like, Sasha. I was like, yeah, because she said she was like, I'm leaving to go to lift, and I was like, do you have a sister?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah.
That's funny. All right. What's this? There we go. Perfect. Okay. This next section is a little bit less priority, but it's just kind of like now you know that you have this option. If you open up your Chrome developer tools, right next to this little button over here that's used for inspecting items, we're not going to inspect, but there's something that looks like a cell phone and a tablet. If you click that, it'll resize your page into something very specific. And this is how you can control what your website looks like based on the number of pixels. So as you resize your page, you can see that this is staying at 400 times 365 pixels, which is responsive. You can also say, if I have a Pixel 2, this is the default size for Pixel 2. If I have an iPad, this is the default size for an iPad. And you can begin to understand what your web page will look like in these different viewports. This is very important for when you're choosing your Bootstrap styling, whether you want to handle different columns with SMs, whether you want to handle different columns with MD and LG. You can resize your web page in a way for you to be able to understand what exactly are my users about to experience when they come to my web page. So we can spend the next 10 minutes, you guys, just playing around with the different view sizes. You can go back to your old exercises and see how it shifts to different columns and what the views look like. The rest of this class is pretty much just for practice and understanding that you have the option to see things from a different size and being able to resize them to a place that you actually care about. So if I did 1,000, you see that's what this looks like. If I did 2,000, it gets bigger. And now you can see this is where the media queries kicked in. So at 2,000 is going to be beyond what I stated in my CSS, which was, in my CSS, I bounded it at 1,500, and I said within 768 and 130 pixels is going to be green, else is going to default to what I stated in the beginning, which was gray over here. When I bring this right back down to 1,000, it's going to hit my media query and turn into green. So you guys can see how your different conditions work at the different screen sizes. Any questions on that? For the rest of the class, it's really just playtime. Use it to ask questions. If you want to leave early, feel free. But that's pretty much it. We covered all the topics that we need to cover today. Cool. I'm not aware of that. Let's wait till your TA gets back. Hey, do they have another homework due currently?
I think it's, I can look at it.
Cool. It's next week? It's next Saturday? Is due tonight? Oh, the first one is due tonight. Okay. Yeah, homework number 1 due tonight, and the second one is next Saturday. Cool. Does that make sense, or is that confusing to some people? Were you unaware homework 1 is due today? All right, I'm seeing a little confused faces. That's not very, doesn't make me feel good. But yeah, feel free to ask questions, but you guys are good to go. I will stop this right here.